Miller's End by Charles Causley. When we moved to Miller's End, every afternoon at 4, a thin shadow of a glade quavered through the garden door, dressed in black from top to toe, and a veil about her head. 'Twas all it seemed as though she came walking from the dead. With a basket on her arm, through the hedge gap she would pass, never a mark that we could spy on the flagstones or the grass. When we told the garden boy how we saw the phantom glide, with a grin his face was bright as the pool he stood beside. "That's no ghost walk," Billy said, "nor a ghost you fear to stop. Only old Miss Wickerby on a short cut to the shop." So next day we lay in wait, passed a civil time of day, said how pleased we were she came daily down our garden way. Suddenly her cheek had paled, turned as quick from ice to flame. "Tell me," said Miss Wickerby, "who spoke of me and my name?" "Bill the garden boy." She sighed, said, "Of course, you could not know how he drowned that very pool, a frozen winter long ago." Happy spooky season, everyone. Looking for a fantastic spooktacular Halloween event? Why not join the Causley Trust at Launceston Hall on the 28th of October for a ghostly town walk, tales of witchcraft and folklore, ghostly music and poems of the late Charles Causley. The Halloween evening will feature folk singer Jim Causley, paranormal investigator Corinne Besant and the Jamaica Inn paranormal team, Simon Costin from Dockacre House and the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle, and folklore expert Mark Norman. The ghostly town walk will begin at 6 p.m. at the town hall and will last approximately 90 minutes. Then at 8 p.m. there will be performances of Charles Causley's ghostly poems, set to music by Jim Causley, a talk from Simon Costin about witchcraft and his work at Dockacre House, and discussion from the Folklore Society's Mark Norman. To find out more about it, why not head on over to listen to the recent podcast episode, A Spooktacular Causley Halloween, and check out the description links in that episode for the Trust, as well as how to get your hands on tickets. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Haunted History Chronicles. The modern conception of the werewolf and its lore is mainly conveyed by the movies, in an unbroken chain beginning with Universal Pictures' The Wolfman of 1941, and continuing today in the Underworld series and more. The roots of these lie in the fiction of the early 20th century. Amongst all of this, werewolf aficionados usually single out one novel as retaining some literary merit. Guy Endor's 1933, The Werewolf of Paris. But what about before this? Many may instinctively imagine roots further back in the medieval world, and that is right enough. The 12th century AD is witness to a remarkable flowering of werewolf tales, from England, France, and the Viking realms of Iceland and Scandinavia. Of all the tales of beasts and magic, perhaps none permeated culture in such a prominent and permanent manner as lycanthropy, and possibly with good reason. These were stories and horrors that lurked in the shadows. The predatory nature of these beasts, and savagery of the attacks, sure to quicken anyone's steps as they walked home late in the evening. During the 15th century, the locals of the small, quiet French town of Dole would experience such a horror at the hands, or more appropriately, paws of a hideous beast, colloquially known as a werewolf. While many such cases existed, albeit with different circumstances and explanations of what had happened, an overshadowing concept that suffuses almost every recorded tale of lycanthropy is the diversion from Christian values and the subjugation of all that is holy. The persecution of werewolves and witches can be traced back to early Roman law, which outlawed the practices of harmful ritual magic and sorcery under a pretense of the harm it causes, but also due to the threat it poses to political stability and the Judeo-Christian tradition, which considered any magical practices as a moral lapse. However, long before even this, werewolves were stalking the writings of the Greeks and the Romans between the 5th century BC, arguably earlier, and the 5th century AD. Striking stories and claims about them are found in such authors as Herodotus and Pliny the Elder. But the best ancient werewolf story is a Latin one, preserved by Petronius in his Bawdy Satyricon in AD 66. Petronius tells how somewhere in Campania, one Nicaros had been making a nighttime trip to visit his girlfriend Melissa, the wife of Terentius the innkeeper, and had brought a soldier friend along for the journey. At a certain point on the grave-lined road, the soldier stopped against one of the tombstones. Nicaros suddenly noticed that he'd taken all his clothes off and piled them up, and was peeing a circle on the ground around them. Then he turned into a wolf, howled, and ran off into the woods. Approaching the clothes, Nicaros discovered that they'd been magically turned to stone. He continued in terror to Melissa's home, where he learned that a wolf had just got in amongst their sheep and had been slaughtering them, but it had run off after a family slave had put a spear through its neck. As Nicaros made his way back home the next day, he found the clothes were gone from the tomb, but in their place was a bloodstain, and on arrival he found the soldier abed, with a doctor treating him for a neck wound. At that point, and only at that point oddly, he realised that the soldier was a werewolf, and refused ever to break bread with him again. In today's podcast, I'm joined by Sarah Blake from Hushed Up History, as we discuss the werewolf and witch hunts of the 15th century, and one particular turbulent trial, where a man proclaimed himself a werewolf for God. The trial of Thiess of Kaltenbrun is a chapter of history that stands alone, during a time when abject terror of the wolf was a very real presence in communities, and fanaticism and religious zeal rife in rooting the werewolf out. A man would admit to actions that typically would result in his death, and throw a courtroom into chaos, and have them questioning what constitutes good and evil. Sarah's account of the trial makes for fantastic reading in Volume 4 of the Feminine Macabre, and is one we're going to explore today. So, sit back, light a candle, lock all the doors, and let's take a walk down the dark, spooky streets of our macabre and haunted past. Hi Sarah, thank you for joining me today.
Hello. Anytime. It's always an absolute pleasure. I'm really, really happy to be here with you.
It's so good to have you back. I mean, last time it was such an incredible chat. It was just so fun, and just the time just didn't feel like any time at all. It was just
It
an
really
incredible.
didn't.
Yeah.
It was awesome. It was such a good time. I had so much fun.
And so this time we're talking something completely different, and I am just as excited to get into what we're going to be talking about today. It's been something that's really kind of like a topic of interest for me for a while. So yeah, I can't wait to pick your brains and chat about the piece that you've written. Before we do that though, do you want to just kind of fill us in on anything that's been happening over on Hushed? I mean, I know you write lots of incredible things. Have you had any particular pieces that you've written lately that have just been like, oh, I've got to write this down. This is one that I'm so excited to write and share?
Oh man. I mean, I always have a list of like things I can't wait to get to, but I gotta say this last one that we're going to be talking about. I know the last time we spoke, I said probably one of my favorites was the stove, the haunted stove story. But I think this one might have surpassed it. I was really, really, really excited about this one, and I found it completely by accident. I was actually looking up something else. I was going to write about some other topic entirely, and not entirely, but and I just kind of stumbled on this. I was like, what? And I was like, oh, well, this is it. We're going to go in this direction instead. This is way more fun.
And I think that's what's really interesting about this one. I mean, I'm trying not to say what it's about yet because I don't want to give it away too soon, but it really is a hushed up bit of history in comparison to other types of trials that were happening at the same time and in the same regions. There's a lot of crossover, but for some reason this hasn't had the same kind of lens put on it and discussion around it in the way that we've seen with these other trials. And that poses lots of questions and thoughts as to why that is, why this really has been very much in the shadows in comparison. Considering they really are part of the same type of brutality and the same type of persecution, and
Right.
that just fascinates me. And so precisely what you just said is how I kind of came across this. You basically just stumble upon this story and you're like, wait, what?
That's
Seriously?
exactly what I said.
And then,
The way I found out about it, like I said, I was reading on a related topic, but not, you know, and I'm reading, and it was one line that was just tossed in at the end of a paragraph, and just like, all right, so anyway, and I'm like, whoa, wait, what? What is this? And then it just kind of went from there, and it turned out to be just one of my favorites that I've read about, written about. It's just, I love it.
I think it's because, it really does kind of conjure up the supernatural in the imagination. It's so unbelievable, it's so preposterous,
Yeah.
and yet it really was something that gripped popular opinion, political discourse, courts, and you can see it crossing over into literature, into art, in the same way that, again, other trials did. And when you make that connection and you sit here today, however many 100 years later, because it spanned quite a lot of time, when you sit here and you realize that today, and you realize that stories that you were very familiar with from your own childhood, when you make those connections as to, that's why these stories were told, it's because
Right.
of this, and you're like, oh my goodness me,
Right.
how have I not made this connection? And in the same way with other trials, I suppose we really should say what it's about.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people think they know what we're talking about,
But probably
and
are
we're
wrong.
probably not. Yeah.
I think most people are going to be thinking, oh, they're going to be talking about witchcraft trials, right? And yeah, it possibly a little bit,
A little bit.
because there is that crossover, but we're kind of going to be talking about more the things that lurk in the shadows, which are werewolves.
Werewolf trials.
Yeah. And this is what I was kind of saying, how there is this real crossover, because it was all very much tied up with the belief in the occult. They were tied up with Satan, something immoral, something anti-Christian, very much being persecuted for a variety of reasons. You see the same kind of hallmarks, but yet something much
there's
more.
there's a lot of common threads between the two. And I mean, I'm not as familiar with the witchcraft trials in Europe as I am with the ones that happened here. But you read about these werewolf trials, and it's like, oh, there's that, there's all these threads that are so similar, and it's kind of mind blowing. Yeah. And these were, I mean, compared to the ones here in North America, these were much, much earlier.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, okay, so hundreds of years later, this was still a thing. This was still going on, just on a totally different location. It didn't really change.
And the manner in which they were carried out, the way that kind of sense of fear, of panic, would build and build and build. Again, you just see all the same hallmarks of later witchcraft trials, and witchcraft trials happening at the same time, particularly in Europe. Just this kind of paranoia. But
it's like these were not fueled by evidence.
Oh gosh, completely.
And anything that was called evidence was only called evidence based on, like you said, this paranoia, this total, just all reason went out the window.
And when you research it, there is very little written about it. There is very little documentation that survived, and very little evidence of just how many werewolf trials there were, because of that crossover with the witchcraft trial. So because you have, again, similarities between the two, the idea of shape-shifting, running with animals, turning into a wolf, these were all things attributed to the witch. And so in many cases,
people who were actually charged with being a werewolf, when they went up in front of a judge, in front of a court, they kind of blended into a witchcraft trial. And so a lot of the documentation doesn't necessarily pinpoint clearly the kind of the build up and what happened and what they were being accused of initially, which was lycanthropic behavior, being a werewolf. And so there isn't a clear number how many people were sadly executed and found guilty of this crime, in the same way that we have with witchcraft trials, where we can be a lot more clearer. And that's quite alarming to me, that it is just this, again, this thing that was taking hold, this thing that was happening. People were writing about it. You had people hunting werewolves. You had all of this propaganda, and yet it seems to have kind of slipped back into the shadows, which is terribly sad.
It's crazy. I remember reading how there were these papers written, these studies, that these numbers are just shocking. There were these scholarly papers and all these studies that just in France, there were tens of thousands of people executed for being accused of being werewolves. But then on the other side, you have other historians that are like, no, it was probably only a couple. I mean, it's horrible to say only a couple, several hundred. It's just such a huge disparity between the accounts. And it's like, why?
I was going to say exactly the same thing. I mean, historians say anywhere between 200 to 30,000, and someone else will say something different. And it's partly because the key kind of people involved weren't clear themselves, because there was this agenda to prove that what they were doing was right, prove that searching out and finding these people who weren't conforming to religious standards of the day, who were the heretics, who were the people on the outskirts of society, these people who needed to be rooted out. Creating this werewolf propaganda was proving what they were doing was right. And so you had so much kind of written precisely for that reason, to justify what they were doing. And yet in their own accounts later would say, well, we didn't actually, I didn't actually execute as many as was written in that pamphlet, and what I said here. And so you get discrepancies amongst the very key people. And it was because it was all serving their own agendas of the day, which was to simply legitimize and justify what they were doing, a lot of the times based around religion.
Right. And I mean, I was going to say, a lot of the times the people forming these narratives were the people that were in the position to do so.
Yeah.
You see in a lot of the werewolf trials, these were people that were, poor, mentally unstable. They were not in a position to really plead their case and put their story and their side of it out there. And even if they did, what chance did they have up against that crazy propaganda of the people in charge?
And they really were in charge. I mean, when I was researching this, I came across, his name was Henri Bouget, or Henri Bouget, depending on if you want to use French pronunciation. And he was a grand judge. He was a demonologist. He was an aspiring politician, but he was also a grand judge. And, he wrote papers about this, pamphlets about this, and he sent numbers of people to sadly be executed, finding them guilty, being part of that process of rooting them out and investigating and finding them and then actually charging them. And so, you can see just precisely what we were just saying. These were people in charge, and yet the very people who were being accused were often very much on the periphery of society. They were being rooted out because they were different. They were often very poor. They were often very kind of separate, living on the outskirts. Often they were being chosen because of where they were living in terms of regionality, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, these were people that were already looked down upon by society. So I mean, they were already absolutely predisposed to be victims of that kind of propaganda and fanaticism and that kind of narrative. And I mean, it's not like the people in charge were the level of power that they had, the level of that they were able to manipulate was so strong that they didn't even have people looking at any form of fact, of any sort of basis. They had it down to a point where they could go, well, he kind of looks like a wolf, doesn't he? I saw him and I saw a wolf within the same night. So, I mean, clearly. And people believed it. They just took that as, yep, that's enough. We got him. It's so mind-boggling to me, that type of just all-encompassing fear and fanaticism and paranoia.
And just like with witchcraft trials, it could encompass, sadly, persecuting entire families, groups of people all in one go, just by association, if you like. And
absolutely,
again, just something that's not really well known. And what happened to these individuals was truly torturous. I mean, European witchcraft trials, I mean,
absolutely,
we know about them.
Brutal.
They're brutal anyway in terms of what they did to them, and they differed from region to region, from beheading to beheading and burning. I mean, you had a variety of different things going on, but there was also something really rather savage and the brutal in the way that those found guilty of being a werewolf were treated post.
Yeah, there was definitely it wasn't as simple as, oh, you committed this crime, allegedly. There was a real hatred there.
Yeah.
There was a real strong sense of just hatred and paranoia. Again, that paranoia, that fear, that was such a driving force. I know they were trials. They may have been held in a court, so to speak, but there was no application of fair law and reason and evidence for these people. Well, that was almost just a formality.
Well, they weren't really even able to put up a defense, and that was the problem. In many cases, they were put in front of a judge where they would have hundreds of witnesses coming forward, all claiming.
This was like a norm, like, oh yeah, we're going to the trial because we saw him. We're gonna. It's just. And then it took so little to just condemn someone.
And like you said, and that was it. Once they were condemned, the end product after that was very swift. Justice was very swift. They usually left the courtroom and then had whatever punishment was deemed appropriate enacted upon them, and that would be it over. Justice would be served, and they would move on until the next kind of story took hold, and it really did. It spread like a wildfire. And I kind of mentioned at the very start that you see this coming through in art and literature. It does. If you look at Renaissance art and literature through that period, how it spread from country to country, crossing borders, just this sense of panic.
100%. I mean, the witchcraft trials and the werewolf trials, here, it was kind of localized. It was very localized. It was, you can pinpoint very specifically, like, this is where these happened here. Over there, it's just, like you said, it was wildfire. It's multiple countries, city after city after city, town after town. It was everywhere. And where it started, it just erupted.
And I think when you start having that kind of moment of panic where one small region maybe has this story and hundreds of people are coming forward and saying, no, this person was a wolf and they committed these acts and they did this, and then you see it kind of played out. When that's then told and it spreads to the next town in the next city and then over the border, you can kind of understand how it would have that real sense of fear, because I think, for witchcraft trials, there is that sense of malevolence. These were characters, these were individuals who were sinister by nature, by their kind of character.
Right.
With the werewolf, there was something much more predatory, something much more, brutal, animalistic, in the shadows, lurking, hunting.
Right. I mean, these were animals that they feared anyway.
Absolutely.
So you're just placing this terror, this actual legitimate threat to your life, and you're applying it to someone who you already have it in for. And I mean, it's just compounding damage to this person. What chance did they have?
And, you know, we can see that. I mean, I looked at Gilles Garnier and a particular family called the Gandelon family. And this kind of came out because I was reading Sabine Baring-Gould's book that was written basically about werewolves. You know, this was a folklorist, this was a historian who basically documented it afterwards. And, you know, you get two very, very different accounts of types of werewolf trials and types of werewolf kind of accusations and build up and how they played out. And so you can see that no one trial was ever the same as another, and no one set of circumstances was the same as another. It was very much dependent on what was happening, but two totally different cases, but brutal, really brutal. I mean, with the case of Gilles Garnier, just this man very much on the outskirts of society, total hermit, living hand to mouth, finding it very, very difficult with his new wife. And I mean, we will never know truly what happened because all that's written about is obviously, sadly, what happened. Yeah. But, you know, him being accused of murdering children, devouring their flesh, bringing the flesh back to his wife, him being discovered near bodies or seen, a wolf seen near these bodies, it being attributed to him because he basically looked like a hermit. He was so downtrodden. He was totally unkempt, and he lived so far away from people that they already didn't like him. And so he started to be associated with being a wolf, committing these murders and doing so in order to eat these children. He was executed. If we look at the Gandelon family, it was children. You know, these were feral children, again, just really poor, hand-to-mouth existence. And they were kind of described as just moving around on their hands and feet because they were so feral.
Right.
They pretty much lived outdoors. And just that association already raised question marks. But they were out playing and came across another set of children who basically attacked them, who came at them with a knife. And when they then reacted to that and seized the knife away, one of these other children were injured, and they were accused of shape-shifting into a wolf to carry out this attack on these children.
And that's all it took.
That's all it took. And they pulled in every single family member. And these young children were found. I mean, just imagine a young child in front of a judge.
Yeah. Hundreds of people
saying, yes, no, I've seen them moving around like a wolf. I've seen them howling like wolves. I've seen them doing this. Just really simple things, all compounding. They can't say anything against that. And they're found guilty and then immediately taken outside where they're stoned to death and then their bodies are ripped to pieces. Like, just totally and utterly shocking.
I mean, this is like, there's just brutality from step one. I mean, you look at the accusations. These weren't just like, you know, for the most part, they weren't just like simple, this was like, oh no, they're eating kids. Mm-hmm. Like, where did you get that? What mindset made these accusations so brutal?
I think there's something very much in kind of the notion of the sins of the flesh within the church. Mm. You know, if we think about people who are being persecuted around this time, witches were being accused of the same thing. You know, they were being accused of devouring children, using the flesh, the fat of children to anoint themselves and to give them this sense of power, particularly in Europe. You know, that was something that was heavily coming through. You know, with werewolves, a lot of cannibalistic type behavior was being attributed to them because it was savage, it was brutal, it was unchristian. If we think about women who were being pushed to the outskirts of society, maybe because they were partaking of sins of the flesh in a different way, you know, right. we can see this kind of real narrative being pushed through to help isolate and marginalize different groups. And a lot of it does stem from those religious morals, those religious kind of ideals, which fascinates me when you consider that at the very heart of the Christian faith is the idea of the blood and the body of Christ,
right?
And partaking in that. But on a different podcast, I was kind of saying how, it's so double standards to kind of have this thread run through these narratives of, okay, well, let's persecute women who are just simply trying to get by, to exist, because, you can't divorce husbands, so you can't get good jobs if you've left your husband. What do you do? Well, they often sadly ended up having to become prostitutes. Well, let's shun them. Let's shun these people and accuse them of eating children as witches and as werewolves. And yet they were legitimately cannibalizing people through corpse medicine. I mean, it's just, it baffles me. It really does baffle me. And, I've said it before, whoever writes history gets to be in charge of it and to create that thread however they want it. But the double standards is just so apparent and truly sad when you see the result for many people.
Oh yeah, you stand on this pedestal of morality, saying that you're condemning these people for brutality. Was justice. That was.
And to see how it filtered into everyday common kind of knowledge, storytelling, narrative. I mean, if we think about stories like the Grimm fairy tales, Little Red Riding Hood, if we think about stories like Hansel and Gretel, where we have werewolves, we have wolves, we have witches. These stories exist. These stories exist because of these trials, because of these werewolf trials, because of these witchcraft trials running rampant through Europe. And like we said, just spreading and growing and crossing borders and having no limits, basically.
I mean, they were stories, but they were less. Beware of the wolf. Watch out.
And like you said, they were creatures that were already feared. These were animals that lurked in the shadows. They were already being attributed to, Satan. They were already kind of feared because of what they could do to, your livestock. There were reasons why that they were kind of hunted, rooted out, just as an animal.
I mean, in a way, the accused and wolves did have that in common. They were just trying to survive. They were just living and just.
Absolutely.
How do you do that?
And that is the question. How do you do that when, your existence is really difficult, when you are marginalized, when you aren't part of the community, when you aren't welcomed within it for any number of reasons, poverty, where you live in the region, your faith, so many small, insignificant things, really, how that could lead you to be pushed and kind of thought of as something sinister already. How do you survive in that kind of an environment? How do you thrive when you don't have the supportive community? And, like we mentioned, these were often people really struggling to survive. And when you don't have any kind of support, and then something like this comes at your door, these kinds of accusations, when nobody's going to stand up for you because everyone is quickly falling in line behind someone else to stand with them and say, yes, no, I agree, I've seen them doing this. You have no chance. There is no way of being able to defend yourself at all. And that's what's really, I think, quite sad, just how quickly everything could become stacked against you.
Before we head back to the podcast, with us all enjoying the current spooky season, right now is the perfect time to head on over to Patreon and explore the daily content suitable for Halloween and all things ghostly. You'll be able to unlock all previous content, as well as access future content. You can find a direct link to the Haunted History Chronicles Patreon page via the podcast description note. Whilst we're talking this spooky season, if you love filling your home with autumnal scents or fragrances to spook and delight, take a listen to this short clip.
Hello, everyone of Michelle's awesome listeners. My name is Sarah, and I am an independent Sensi consultant. I have been listening to Haunted History Chronicles like you, and I would like to tell you about some awesome products for all of my paranormal friends like you. Sensi is a safer alternative to candles. You just melt our wax with the heat of a low watt light bulb or element and fill your space with fragrance, not flame, smoke, or soot. We have so many warmers for the spooky season coming up. Starting with Paranormal Pumpkin. This perfectly carved pumpkin will haunt your dreams in the best possible way. Turn it on for an eerie glow that will last long after the trick-or-treaters have gone to bed. It's hand-painted and 7 inches tall. Or a favorite of mine, the Haunting Good Time Warmer. Up for a good fright? Fun is lurking in the shadows of this haunted house. Just lift the roof to warm your favorite fragrance. It is also hand-painted and 10.5 inches tall. We also have mini warmers like the Ghoulish Grip that is 3.5 inches tall. A skeletal hand grips its favorite brew while a dramatic color contrast is ready to turn some heads. Get ready for Halloween and fill your life with fragrance by visiting my website at sarahcsmells.scentsy.us. That is Sarah with an H, C, smells.scentsy.us. Thank you.
And now let's get back to the podcast.
And I think that's what made your particular piece so very fascinating, because here you have a werewolf trial that is very different
That
to any other kind
ended
of
up
werewolf
being
trial.
completely opposite to everything we just said. You read about and you learn
Absolutely.
about, and then you read this, and it's like, what? How? How did this happen?
Just the idea of a werewolf of God, something that is considered to be linked to the devil, somehow also now being connected with the work of God, doing God's work. So, just defies every other type of werewolf trial.
And I mean, this guy, he wasn't even in the courtroom for himself. He was in the courtroom to testify against a church thief. And it just kind of came up like, hey, he's a werewolf, right? And then everything turned in this courtroom.
But I wonder if that kind of accusation came out precisely for that reason. Like, you're in trouble. You're being accused of something that's going to get you into trouble. How can I get myself out of this fix? I know. Let's accuse this person. Let's tell the court, well, this person's a werewolf. Takes all scrutiny away from me, and now it's firmly on this other person.
I mean, I know I stole from the church, but I mean,
I'm not a werewolf. I'm not a werewolf.
And then he goes and turns it even. I mean, the transcript of this trial is just so twisty. There are so many turns. It's bonkers. It's, we're in court for a church thief. Well, this guy's a werewolf, but wait, he's a werewolf for God? Wait, what? It's amazing.
And you can imagine how baffling it would have been with that kind of coming up and the way it was playing out, to really understand the very difficult moral dilemma, right?
I so wish there was an account from someone who was just there that day. Mm-hmm. just like, well, now this guy's a werewolf. Well, now he's a werewolf for God. Now he says the real evil people are the sorcerers, not him. And it snowballed so much from just that one first, like, hey, he's a werewolf. And then by the end of the transcript, it's just like, that was wild.
So do you want to, I'm going to get his name terribly wrong.
Oh, I probably will too.
I'm not sure his would be a name that would necessarily be used today in Sweden, but I might be wrong. But it's not a name I've ever come across when kind of seeing Swedish names. So I don't know if it's still popular.
I've just been going with Thiess.
Snap, that's how I've read it. The Thiess of, I think it's Kaltenbrunn.
Kaltenbrunn, yep.
We're probably going to have people go, no.
Yeah, probably.
So apologies.
Sorry. I apologize. But yeah, Thiess of Kaltenbrun, Livonian werewolf.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about him, how this kind of came about and how it played out? Because honestly, it is so incredible. You just couldn't believe it would be possible, really.
Right. I didn't. That's why that's what fascinated me about this. Because like I said, I was digging up information to write about one of the more well-known werewolf trials.
Mm-hmm.
And just this last line in a paragraph was like, if you were condemned as a werewolf, it was a death sentence, except for this guy who claimed he was a werewolf for God and he was let go. And that was it. That's all they said about it. I'm like, wait, what? Tell me more about this. And when I started reading the transcript, it was amazing. So this guy, Thiess, he was in his 80s. This took place in 1691. And he was brought into a courtroom to testify against a church thief. But his landlord, when he took the oath, his landlord kind of chuckled. And the people in the court were like, why are you laughing? And he's like, because I think it's real funny. You got this guy taking an oath. He's a werewolf. And the whole trial just took a turn. But this,
just like, yeah, I'm a werewolf, love it.
Totally. Just,
I used to be a werewolf for God. Me and some werewolf buddies, we go down
to hell a couple times a year, and we take back all the harvest that the demons and the sorcerers took, and we bring it back up for you guys, so you're welcome. And I mean, what do you say to that at this time period with everything going on? You have this guy that's like, yeah, what? I'm doing this for you. Like, remember that really good harvest we had? Yeah, that was because of me and my werewolf buddies going down to hell and taking the harvest back. So,
and when we didn't get it right,
here?
Remember that really bad harvest? That was because we weren't quite as good that year.
Right?
Again, like you said, how do you argue with that? Because...
And I kind of love, who are you? If you're for God, then who are you against? And he's so matter of fact about it. He's just like, the sorcerers, obviously. Like, where have you been? The sorcerers are the bad guys. So can we move along now? Like, he just wants to get, it's like, yeah, it's fine. Can we just get back to what we were doing? We're going to talk about you being a werewolf for God now. And that's where the whole trial goes, is forget about this church thief guy. We have God's werewolf before us now, and we got to figure this out.
And how do you do that when they are supposed to be completely evil? And yet you're saying you're doing this for God to help all of us in our community so that we don't have famine, so that we do live well, so that we do have food to eat.
I mean, and it's kind of genius.
Yeah. I mean,
this guy is just like, listen, you want to persecute me, just so you know. Might come back to you when I can't go down and take back everything that the devil took. So you might just want to think about that, just saying. What do you do? What do you do? And in the end, I mean, he was let go. He was not killed. He wasn't condemned like almost every other werewolf trial you hear. He was whipped, and then he was told, get out of here. He was exiled, and then we never hear about him again. And it's such a crazy story.
I mean, you can't.
There's just this guy who's just totally, and like at one point they have a minister there, and the minister is, asking him all these questions, and he flat out tells the minister, listen, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that right there in 1691 was like, and there's just this guy Thiess who's just in court, just like, all right, what now? Like, giving it to him. It was just fascinating to me. And then they come back and just say, all right, but we don't want to see you here again.
I think they kind of came to the conclusion, well, we can't really punish him, but we don't want him around us either, just in case.
Right. Like, I gotta wonder,
what do we do? What do we do?
The judge, and I gotta wonder if the judge and the rest of the court, if the reason that they let him go, not only was there just this little, it's so funny to me, there's just this little thread of like, well, what if he's right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if he is right, and I kill this man, and the rest of the harvests from now on are terrible, this town's going to look at me and say that it's my fault that they're dying of starvation. And I can't deal with that politically, socially. So was this a move really to cover himself?
Oh, I think so completely, because, you know, the threat of a poor harvest was the thing that they were really feared, and Europe had been blighted by it, and it had been devastating. Right. It caused famine, it caused disease. There was so much death as a result of it.
I mean, there's nothing you can do.
No.
I mean, if you don't have your sustenance back then, I mean, that was it. That was it. So to have this guy to be like, you know, I'm the one that's kind of been saving all of you with my work with God against the sorcerers in hell. It's hard to argue with that, regardless of if he's a werewolf or not. It's hard to argue against the person who's like, listen, it's all because of me. But there's no way that you can prove it's not.
But you can see how they tried. I mean, they went the same kind of route about accusing him of eating things raw, and he was like, no, we roasted it. You know, I'm not that savage.
He's like, we're exactly. I think he actually says that in the transcript. Like, listen, I'm not an animal. When we eat as men, and we roast it. Like, what are you thinking? His matter-of-factness about it, just, I love it. I love reading this transcript, and he's so just like, what are, like, hello? I'm a human.
You have to wonder again if the reason, you know, part of the reason why he may also have been really kind of thought of as this conundrum, and what do we do, and how do we respond to this, was precisely because of who he was as a character, that he did just stand there quite brazenly and say these things and go, well, yeah, I do that, but I do it as a man. I'm not a savage, you know, I'm not an animal.
What do you do? What do you exactly?
Whereas
and then later on, like, he starts off by like, oh yeah, I used to be a werewolf. That's not something I do anymore. But by the end of the trial, he's like, no, I'm still a werewolf. You got me. And and they're still just like, what do we do with this guy?
And it's a shame that we don't know more about him as an individual before this.
Right.
I wonder if he was an educated person within the community. I wonder if he was something kind of atypical to the usual person accused.
I was wondering that too, like how, you know, we were just talking about how people who were brought in accused as werewolves, they were already condemned just by who they were in society.
Absolutely.
I did wonder, I'm like, did this guy walk in with the opposite of that? Is that a reason that they were like, I don't know, like, it's Thiess. Come on, it's Thiess. But we don't know. We have I couldn't find anything about him before or after this trial. This whole trial transcript is his existence.
This is what's frustrating about, you know, things like this, because sadly you don't necessarily have that full picture. But just the fact that he was able to bring this to the attention of the court and accuse someone else, to me suggests that there had to be some sway, some power, some connection with the court, because it was all usually done kind of between friends, between, you know, political friends, church friends, people with power. You know, they had the voice, they had the ability to do that.
Right. So, I was going to say that. It says something just in the fact that they let him talk.
Yeah.
Says something.
And the way he was then able to continue to talk in the trial in the way that he was. And like we were saying, to be able to speak up and speak against ministers, you know, the judge asking questions.
You don't know what you're talking about. What?
Nobody else would have been able to get away with that. It would have only compounded to their guilt. And yet somehow here it was to his favor. And that's really quite unusual. And again, suggestive, I think, that maybe he had some kind of standing within society. And so what do you then do when this is somebody maybe who isn't the downtrodden person on the outskirts who people aren't going to miss? Maybe this was someone that they were fearful of sadly executing, of finding guilty.
Right,
for a
because
number of
even
reasons.
besides the werewolf accusation, what came up later in the transcript was they're like, well, you know, he is really good with herbs. He is really good with medicine. He did help my horse. He did help this family member. Like, there's a whole lot to prove here that this guy isn't the evil, bloodthirsty werewolf. So again, it's not only is this guy saying that, you know, I'm responsible for all your food, which they couldn't, you know, he's like, how are you going to prove I'm not? Well-known reputation and results of, no, this guy is helpful. He has been a helpful member of this community. Do we want to give that up?
Which is a fascinating kind of element to this case, because again, when you see this crossover with witchcraft trials, those types of accusations normally in a witchcraft trial would have been burn the witch, you know, and
exactly.
yet here for this particular figure, it's being used as a kind of a character witness, you know, something that was good, that was positive. And again, to me, it's suggestive that maybe he really did have some kind of position, either through what he was doing for the community, through wealth, through family. I don't know.
It just took so little to condemn you to death as a werewolf. Like, what was it about him that was able to override that and be allowed to not only be allowed to be like, all right, you're like, he left the courtroom that day and they didn't give the judgment for a couple days later. So this guy, they're like, all right, he's a werewolf. They let him walk out of the courtroom. They let him go about his life for a couple of days while they decided what to do with him. It's so not how any of these other trials were carried out.
Oh no,
it's
I mean,
amazing.
It's the total polar opposite. It's fascinating. And it's just such a shame that we really don't know the before and we don't know the after to kind of see how it really fully played out within this community, because it is so unusual. It really is startling in comparison.
That's why I love this story so much.
And he had this platform, and to be given that platform as he was being accused of being a werewolf, he's being allowed to speak in this way. He's being given a voice to challenge, to counter challenge. And again, what's fascinating is that there didn't seem to be a huge kind of lineup of people siding against him. And again, that's unusual. So, it's just
everything
a really
about
interesting case.
It's so contradictory to everything else that I've ever read about werewolf trials, witch trials. It's such a contradiction. And it's just so fascinating to me to be like, well, why did this happen this way? Like, it's not like it was toward the end of, like, where people were kind of starting to question their practices, or this was right in it.
It was in the thick of it, yeah.
And you got Thiess, who's just, I'm a good guy. I'm the good werewolf. And instead of just hearing that word come out of his mouth, it's like, oh, that's it, condemn him. They listened and they were concerned. And like you said, he had character witnesses. Like, it's amazing. It's such a contradictory, amazing story.
I don't know if I want to kind of pat him on the back, if I could.
Right?
Or just kind of chin on the floor, kind of boggle at how he did it. But it is just a kind of a masterclass, really, in turning what is, I think, probably one of the most direst situations you can find yourself encountering, you know, being able to turn that around and to walk out before any kind of judgment has been given, but then afterwards to be able to leave, get on with your life with minimal payback in comparison to people being stoned to death, torn to pieces, you know, thrown from cliffs. I mean, they had all sorts of things done to them, and here is this elderly man walking out of the courtroom, basically, well, we don't know what to do with you, get on with it, type of a situation.
Just get out of here, we don't want to see you anymore. It's like, oh, that's like, he lived.
He is the werewolf who lived.
Right, exactly. God, I wish we knew what happened to him. I wish we knew where he went.
I'd seriously like to just sit down and have a drink with him and go, how did you do that? Because
how did you walk in and you walked in first as just a bystander. Then you were the accused. And within a couple hours, you had everyone in the palm of your hand. You were in control of that courtroom, which again did not happen.
No. I'd also quite like to know what happened to the actual church thief. If anything happened there, or he just basically
he slunk out the
dodge. Door. He got out as quickly as possible.
Exactly. He's like, they're distracted. I'm gonna head out.
This is where I make my exit.
I was kind of surprised too when, you know, they were like, well, who are the bad guys? He's like, the sorcerers are the bad, and he says it. They kept no pun intended. They kept hounding him. You know, who are the bad guys? Who is against the devil? Who's with the devil? And he keeps saying, I told you, it's the sorcerers. I told you, it's the sorcerers. The sorcerers are the one. And yet they never asked him, well, then name the sorcerers.
No.
And I mean, in so many of these other trials, witchcraft trials, are like, all right, well, name the others. Give us the names.
And they would have been tortured until they gave evidence.
And he's just like, admitted. No.
But again, I have to wonder, is that because maybe they were fearful of who he might say? You know, was this a person with some kind of position within society? So therefore, the people he's associating with, were they not, were they people they didn't want to be named, that they were worried he would name if he did? You know, there's so much intrigue to it, and just layers and layers of questions. Because it is so strange. It's so unusual.
I'm so thankful that this court transcript exists. And you can read it online. It's you can find free PDFs of it all over the place, and you read through it, and it's just line by line. It just gets crazier and crazier. And it's just, I know I've said it, I keep using the word amazing, but it really is. It's just such a wild story. And it's just such an individual little chapter of legal history and history of just the werewolves trials and the witch trials. It's just such a standalone thing.
And I would urge people to kind of take a look at some of these, because you can view them easily online if you search for them. You know, you can read Sabine Baring-Gould's book online. You can see transcripts of some of these trials. But, you know, just knowing about them, that's the starting point. And that's the really wild bit to me, that we just don't know about them. They're not part of popular discussion. They're not discussed in the same way that we discuss these other types of persecutions. And yet they are exactly the same. You know, we've already kind of mentioned that. We've talked about that. And it's just... It's so strange to me that they don't have that place, considering the accusations that were being levied, and to see how really it did become so much part of popular culture, that these were stories handed down from generation to generation to generation as lessons to learn from. And we still tell them today without making those connections with these moments of our past, to not realise that they were rooted in trials like Thiess, like Gilles Garnier, like Gandelon family, like so many other people, so many other names that have just been lost to history.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, and we tell these stories not knowing the very dark thread and the very dark association of these hidden wolves within our communities who lurk in homes, like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, who will lurk in someone's home, pretending to be someone else, pretending to be human-like. You know, they are among us type thing. And we tell them as
I mean, if you show, any kid a picture of, in Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf dressed up as grandma, they know the story.
Mm-hmm.
that is still a staple among children's stories, and it's like, well, that came from somewhere, and it's dark. So
it's just wild to me, and this is what I love about hushed up history, because it says it all really in the title. It's the hushed up bits of history. It's the darker bits, the bits that aren't known, that aren't spoken about, that kind of lie between the crevices of history that gets yelled about. It's kind of giving those moments, because they are also part of where we've been and where we are now, and understanding our place amongst all of that and how we've got to where we are is so important, I think. And these trials should not be forgotten. What happened to these people was just truly horrific. And there was no, just like with witchcraft trials, there was no barrier that would stop someone from being accused. Age didn't matter. There were incredibly young children accused and sadly executed. Gender didn't account for much. You could be a boy, a girl, a man, a woman, an old man like Thiess in his 80s. An accusation was made.
It makes me wonder even more, like, especially with Thiess, like, in any of these trials, in any country, it makes you wonder, like, how did those survivors survive?
Yeah.
What did you do that you were able to avoid this cloud that just had nothing in its way? It's just, how did you do it? How did you avoid that?
And it's one of those, again, we find it very difficult to really understand, I think. But these really did leave such a terrible dark mark on communities and areas and regions and countries, because a lot of the time these were individuals kind of being pulled into this drama. It was a machine that fed itself. And so
very much so, yeah.
You're accusing people from within your community. You're accusing your neighbors. You're accusing people that you know, and then you're living with family members who you've helped to sentence a loved one to death. And it was all done so publicly and by the community.
And it was treated so just like, I'm doing my duty. I'm helping.
Yeah.
And you got to walk down the street and look at those people. And then it comes down, like, what prevents them from accusing, like you had brought up earlier, the rest of
exactly. And like I said, the mark that it leaves on communities, on families. I mean, if you think about it, if you take out a particular a member of a family, that person might be the breadwinner. You're then condemning the rest of that family to abject poverty. How do they survive then without that particular person? What route does that lead them to? And I mean, it's just truly, truly horrific. And like I mentioned, just something that I think people really should know about, because it shouldn't be forgotten. That kind of fear like that should be something that we talk about so it doesn't get repeated, because accusing someone of being a werewolf is, in today's society, accusing someone of being something else. The same kind of fear can provoke that feeling of needing to herd people into groups of, this is me, I'm safe here, I know I'm morally right, these groups are something different, I fear them, I need to keep them away from me, they're not part of who we are as the good guys. And that's a mindset division. It's a mindset we have to be very, very careful of, I think.
It's I was watching something recently about the Black Plague, I mean,
oh yeah.
And the way that they speak about things like the Black Plague, it's so just like, yes, this disease came in and it ravished these countries. It destroyed these families. It shook up the social structure of and court records and issues of like land ownership, and it's presented in a very, for lack of a better word, a very like historical way.
Yeah.
But you have these trials, these werewolf trials, that had very similar effects. It wasn't a disease. Well, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't, a biological thing, but it was a mindset that did the same thing. It came in, it ravaged families, it destroyed towns, cities, countries, uprooted social structures. And they're looked at so differently.
Yeah.
They're looked at with such a more scientific eye versus a much more just like, oh, that was a crazy, thing that happened. They did the same thing.
It's precisely that kind of element to it that I think shows just the kind of the root of it, because it was this kind of direst need to provoke, create fear, keep it going, perpetuate that fear, that I think in some ways still has it buried, because it's so unusual and so kind of out of the norm that it's still something that we kind of, I think in some ways might be a little bit still worried about talking about, because it's like, well, if we acknowledge that's kind of what we can do as humans, what does it say about us, But actually, I think we only really learn from something by looking at it in the mirror, facing it, actually saying what it is, talking about
that's
how
the root of that's the root of so many buried is we just don't want to admit that humans did this.
Yeah. We're
not all sunshine and rainbows. Like, we've done some horrible things as humans to humans, and we have to realize that and not glorify it. Nobody's looking to make a joke of it, just acknowledge, we did this, let's learn from it. And it's just something that people are still so hesitant to do.
Yeah, which is staggering to me, because like I said, how can you ever really take on board something unless you face it and you acknowledge it and you talk about it? The more we continue to silence history, we're only continuing to silence the very big types of questions and discussion points and thoughts that we should be having, and the types of things that we should be learning from, talking about, and we just don't. And it's much easier to, as a teacher, it's much easier to kind of talk about the decimation of the Black Death in this factual way, because it was a disease. It wasn't us. It was an illness. It was a disease running rampant that was causing this kind of fear, this devastation, this impact on communities, as opposed to it was us doing it. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
We can easily separate ourselves from something and talk about something when it's not us kind of in the driving seat. And when that kind of shifts, I think it becomes a little bit murkier in some cases, particularly when it's kind of wrapped up in witchcraft trials and in werewolf trials and these types of things that are hidden. And for some reason, again, I think it is because of just the type of nature of accusations and what it was. For some reason, witchcraft trials has got that platform in a way that werewolf trials don't. And I simply think it's because we're associating people as animals, literally as an animal, a breathing animal, committing savage acts. And what does that say about us? Could we be a savage? And the answer is yes, we could.
Absolutely.
Does it mean we're werewolves, though?
No. I mean, it's the seeds of so many of these accusations and these trials. You hear people that are like, oh, whatever, we don't have to hear about that. That happened hundreds of years ago. That's not a thing anymore. It absolutely is. The roots of these trials, the roots of these accusations are still very much around. And I think that's something that people really have to recognize and have to be conscious of is, it's not just, oh, he's a werewolf. Well, we don't have to worry about that anymore because we're better than that now. We've advanced beyond that. Have we? Why were they being accused as werewolves? Let's get to the bottom of that. We're not past that.
No, because think about how we treat some parts of our own societies. How there is still that sense of difference. We like to create groups. Human beings actually, as human beings, create groups. It's how we operate, and it's precisely that creates situations like this. And we also have to acknowledge that in some cases these were people potentially doing terrible deeds to survive. And there may have been reasons for that. I mean, there are medical reasons why someone can behave like a wolf, for a start.
Yeah.
There are other reasons at play here. But again, not being able to kind of labour the point too much, it's only through talking about it that we truly understand what happened, what went wrong, and why we ended up with potential
tens of thousands of
30,000.
people.
Yeah, which
gone.
is unbelievable. I mean, if you think about that, just think about the number of families, the number of family lines potentially cut short, the potential, future musicians, future artists, future storytellers, gone. When we think about those kinds of numbers in terms of war, people who've lost those types of numbers in countries, it's awful. It's something that makes us really stand and pause and realize the atrocity. And
I mean, these were wars in a sense.
They were.
I mean, at least the people who were very different kinds, and the people who stood at the on the podiums and on the pulpits, they very much so thought they were at war. They thought they were at war with Satan. So they went all in.
Yeah.
And it just the effects were just devastating in so many ways.
And it's something that we kind of see kind of happening in countries more and more, where events like Salem become acknowledged however many years later. Even within Sweden, where Thiess is from, some of the witchcraft trials that took place, they're now acknowledged. They are commemorated. The names aren't forgotten. They're not lost. Particular regions will talk about the horrific trials that took place and what happened to individuals. But yet we haven't had that happen yet for werewolf trials. And
well, even with the witch trials, we acknowledge them. We're at a point where people do talk about them, but there's still a vast misunderstanding.
I think there's
of so many aspects of it. I can't tell you how many times I go to Salem fairly often, and I can't tell you how many times are like, where were they burned?
Yeah.
And where were they buried? And it's like, that didn't happen here. And they're like, what do you mean it didn't happen here? And it's like, no, that was over in Europe. And people are just like, what do you mean? Like, no, witches were burned. And it's just it's like, yeah, these witch trials happened anyway, move along. And they don't, for the most part, people don't want to dive into it. They don't want to get into the details of it and the explaining of it. And I think it's at least partially, because of what you had said before, is because eventually you keep digging, you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that we did this to each other.
Yeah.
And it's not something people want to deal with.
It's an uncomfortable talking point, isn't it? And
yes.
It just helps. It's part of examining our own human nature. And again, we've said it already that we just don't like doing that. It makes us uncomfortable. But we should. Oh. Absolutely. I can't wait to see what you will write next. I mean, I always love reading what you write. I mean, and they do vary so much. I mean, I'm
glad to hear that, because that's really what I strive for. Is I really try. I work really hard to try to not have stories pinpointed. I try really hard to find things from everywhere, across all time frames, all countries, all subject matters. I try to throw in, a couple feel-good ones here and there. But I really do try to make it a very wide spectrum of stories, because there's just so many.
Absolutely. And I love how you find ones that are not necessarily known about. I mean, I remember reading a few months ago the trial from Yorkshire, the witchcraft trial from Yorkshire.
Yeah.
We're obviously talking about this now. I mean, that's where I hail from, believe it or not. I mean, I do not have a Yorkshire accent, but that's where my family comes from. And it's not one I know. And I know plenty of witchcraft trials from across England and Scotland, but that was not one I'd heard of. And
really
fascinating one. And I just love that you give these little moments their place so that someone can read them. So someone else is going to take that information in and know those names. And yeah, I mean, just so incredibly varied, so different. And
oh, that makes me so happy to hear. Really, thank you so much.
That's honestly what I love. I mean, you write about anything and everything under the sun. I mean, your last one was this like chess master who, I mean, like
the mechanical chess master. Yeah.
I mean, just so different, but just incredible. This kind of illusion, this kind of mystery, just real different kind of.
I hope that's part of it. I hope anybody that like reads it has that little bit of like, what's coming up next?
Yeah, you never know. You never ever know.
But that's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that. That really makes me happy.
But sometimes I do wonder if you and I have twin brains, even though we do not live on the same continent, because often when you kind of post something or you're writing about something, it's something that in the background I'm researching or I've read about.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, and I'm like this.
Oh, that's
Sarah.
neat.
It's like, how does that happen? But I'll have maybe come at it from a different angle or found something else, and I'm like, I really want to talk to Sarah about this. Oh, I really want to talk to Sarah about this.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so funny.
It's so frequently the thing that pops in my brain.
Wow, that's really, especially because like, should I have stories planned in advance months? Yeah, I probably should. Do I? No. A lot of times what I end up writing about and posting are things that I have a very long list, and it's normally something that I just randomly pick off of that list at any point, or it's something I like took a screenshot of because I just heard of. They're not far in advance. So the fact that you said they coincide with things you're looking at, that's really funny.
But I think it is because I do the same thing. Like I'll be researching something, I'll be finding out about something, I'll be talking to people about something. And in the process of that, part of my brain goes sideways onto something else. And then another part of my brain goes somewhere else. And it's just this, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like this, just these fingers going everywhere.
It's a total lottery as far as what I end up posting when. That's not planned.
That's what's beautiful about it. So I will make sure if people still have not found you, they should, because it is like a lottery, like you said. You never know what prize you're going to win.
Maybe that's what I should do. Maybe I should like write a bunch of them on paper and just pick one. I don't know.
That's chance though.
It is. But see, like, because of like how much I try to have things like different from like the last thing I posted, I'll pull two things, and in some way I'll be like, no, that's similar to that for that reason. I'll pull something else. It won't work either way.
I can sympathize with that one, and it's kind of sad because it means you have to bury something for a little while until it's okay for you to bring it back out again when it's no longer close to that other story that you've just told.
There's things on my big giant list. I have over like, at this point it's over 300 things on this list, and I'll look back like way at the start of the list when I started kind of writing down ideas, and I'm like, well, I can't really write about that anymore because since I wrote that down, that's become like a big known story in the years since. So all right, well, we'll get rid of that one, but all right, there's something else, I'm sure.
You need to write a book, Sarah. That's what you need to do. You just need to commit to putting them into a book. And
that is the thing I want to do next. I really want to just start printing these and putting them out there.
I'll buy it, and I'm sure there would be plenty of other people that would buy it. I'd be there like as soon as it's out at midnight. I'd be there getting my copy, reading it. I'd probably have finished it by the morning.
Oh my god! At some point, this was over a year ago, I started just putting everything into one big giant Word document because I just, out of sheer curiosity, I just wanted to see, like, how many pages have I done with this in the last 7-8 years or however long it's been. I can't even remember off the top of my head. And it was like it was ridiculous. It was way over 1,000 pages.
Oh, so books 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Right? I'm like, oh, I guess I'm doing volumes. All right.
Go for it. Hushed Up
I would
History
love
Volume
to.
1, Hushed Up History Volume 2. And you already have the perfect title. I mean, it really is just the perfect title for a book. Honestly, do it. If there's any publishers or people in books, like, hit Sarah up.
That's where, I mean, it's already written. It's just all hanging out. But that is like the next thing that I would really love to do is start printing these and getting them out there, and next step.
Oh, I hope it happens. Honestly, I would
Me
be
too.
over the moon for it.
I love that you said it has a perfect title, because you have no idea how long it took me to come up with a title for this thing when I started it.
I'm terrible with titles.
It
takes me ages to come up with a podcast title.
I so clearly remember sitting on a couch like years ago and just agonizing over, I want to do this blog. What am I going to call this? And I mean, it took forever. And then at some point, it was just like, hushed up history. Okay, we're going to go with that, because that's the only thing I've come up with that I haven't been horrified by. So we're going to go with Hushed Up History. And it works. It works. So
it does work. But I will make sure that we've already got your details on the website from when you came and spoke about premature burial. But we'll make sure we get your information in the kind of the description notes as well, so anybody can come and find Hushed Up History and read the backlog of articles and things that you've written, but also the future content, because there's a lot on there.
There's at this point, I've been doing this for almost 9 years, and there's hundreds of backlog of stories. It started on Halloween. It's almost Hush's birthday coming up. So, but there's hundreds and hundreds of stories that are just hanging out on the archive on the website. You can go and explore, and
I promise there will be stories that you find that you're like, no way. No
I hope so.
Way. And that's when Sarah's done a good job, because there are some beauties on there, some real.
There are some doozies.
Yeah, that you just.
I really hope, I know when I read something, when I read about Thiess, I know how I felt, that that moment of just like, oh, no way. That awesome feeling of when you find something that you just, I don't really know how to describe it. It's just such a cool feeling to read something that just has that, makes you just be like, oh my God, really? Wow. And I really hope that something I have put on there would cause somebody to feel that awesome feeling. That would be great to know.
And do something with it. I mean, Thiess' story, wouldn't it make a great play? Wouldn't you go and see it played out in a theatre?
Absolutely, I would.
I'd go and watch that. So there is so much content here that would just make for fabulous stories to be continued to be told, to again have that place in history. And it takes people like you and what you're doing with Hushed Up History to maybe bring something to the forefront of people's minds that ordinarily we wouldn't know about.
Here, look at this madness.
Yeah, but they're just such incredible bits of information, and so varied, and they jump from region, from time zones, and so there really is kind of something on there for everyone. It's not something that's going to only be appreciated by people who live in a particular country or are interested in a particular aspect of history. It's just so wide, so varied. So honestly, you've just got to take a look if you haven't, if you're listening.
I appreciate that more than I can tell you. That's exactly what I wanted it to be, was just this insane collection of just what?
Yeah.
From everywhere, at every point, and every time, everything. Because that's where the stories are. They're not in one place. They are everywhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time again. I'm hoping,
thank
in the future we will be able to chit chat about something else. We've talked about werewolves, we've talked about premature burial.
Talked about werewolves, talked about burial.
Who knows what next? I have no idea, but I'm sure whatever it is going to be will be good.
This again, the first time was so much fun. This was wonderful. Anytime. I will be so happy to chat weird stuff with you. Love it.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will.
Thank you so much.
And I'll say goodbye and goodbye to everyone. So bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.
If you like this podcast, there's a number of things you can do. Come and join us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Spread the word about us with friends and family. Leave a review on our website or other podcast platforms. To support the podcast further, why not head on over to join us on Patreon, where you can sign up to gain a library of additional material and recordings, and in the process know you're helping the podcast continue to put out more content. On a final note, if you haven't read it already, then you can find my piece In Search of the Medieval in Volume 3 of The Feminine Macabre over on spookeats.com or via Amazon. Links to the book will also be in the episode description. Thank you everyone for your amazing support.